Hey, what is going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Kogmaw Jungle and why I think it could be sleeper OP this patch. You guys did seem to like my video on the Volibear Jungle, where I basically went over him, did like a mini guide on him, so I'm going to be doing the same for Kogmaw Jungle here. So with that being said, guys, let's get into the video. So first up, Kogmaw actually does have some really good clears in the early game. If you do start Krugs on him, which I would recommend doing, then you're going to get that proc, or you're going to get the stun proc every 5th auto attack, which works really well with Kogmaw's W. He gets the attack speed when he does use his W, so he's going to proc that every 5th auto attack really fast, and therefore he's really not going to take a whole lot of damage in the jungle. I found that when I finish my full clear, I'm at full HP with only using 1 or 2 potions. It depends on how well you clear out and if you do use your stun correctly and if you kite the camps, but the point is you do stay pretty healthy in the jungle as Kogmaw, which is quite surprising. I really didn't think that you would when I started picking him up. Now, as for his ganks in the early game, they're not the best, but they also aren't the worst. When you compare him to someone like Graves, who is also a ranged jungler, I do think that Kogmaw has better ganks than Graves in the early game because Kogmaw does have, or he is going to have, the red buff after his first clear, and therefore when he is ganking top lane, as long as his top laner does have some decent crowd control, then you should be able to at least burn the enemy's flash, since Kogmaw does have the slow and the longer range coming out of his W. He's also got the slow on his E too, so if he can hit his slow on his E and he can get his red buff proccing, then he should be able to pull off some pretty good ganks, and better ganks than Graves, to be honest, in the early game. Kogmaw is actually really strong at soloing Dragon in the early game. Once you do pick up Bloodrazor on him, you can solo it really easy without even dropping to below half HP, so I would highly recommend doing this. For example, if you see the enemy jungler top lane, or if you just buy a pink and put the pink on Dragon to make sure they don't have vision on you, then you can look to take it solo and look to get your team ahead by getting that first Dragon. He can also shred Baron really well too, especially once he does get Rageblade. So if it's like 25 minutes into the game and you see the enemy AD carry bot lane, you could look to go for Baron because you're going to deal so much damage to it with your Bloodrazor and your Rageblade. So never be afraid to take Baron early on in the game with Kog, since he will deal a lot of damage to it. Bloodrazor is also getting a nice buff this patch, which is really going to help Kogmaw Jungle out. It's going from 40% attack speed up to 50%, and it also now deals 4% of the target's maximum health as the passive instead of 3%. So overall, this is a really nice buff to Kogmaw Jungle. It's also going to be a really good buff to someone like Kindred Jungle. So if you are thinking about playing Kogmaw Jungle, I would definitely try to ban out someone like Kindred or one of the stronger early game junglers, just so you don't get invaded on in the early game. And once you do get to the late game build on Kogmaw, where you've got your Bloodrazor, Rageblade, Hurricane, and Blade of the Ruined King, then the enemies can build as much armor and as much HP as they want, but that won't matter because Kogmaw is just going to be able to shred them really well, which is why I do think he is a good pick in the right situation. So you guys are probably wondering when you would pick Kogmaw Jungle. Now, I wouldn't pick him every single game, obviously, and I wouldn't go blind picking him because he can definitely get countered by a lot of the stronger early game junglers. But when I would pick him is if your team does have a tanky top laner, someone like a Maokai, and your support is playing someone like Braum, then in that situation, I would go ahead and play Kogmaw Jungle because you do have some pretty good peel on your team. You've got some good tanks with the Maokai and the Braum, so there's really no reason to pick like a tanky jungler in that situation. I would definitely pick someone like Kogmaw so you do have a lot more damage once you do get to that mid to late game. Now, as for the runes on Jungle Kogmaw, it's pretty standard. I pretty much take the same page on all of my AD junglers, which is I'm going Armor Seals, Magic Resist Glyphs, I'm going the Attack Speed Quints, and then the AD Marks. That's the page that you can take on pretty much every single jungler or AD jungler, and you can do well with it. Now, as for the masteries on the Jungle Kogmaw, I'm taking the same page that I would run on my 80 carry Kogmaw. I'm taking the Fervor of Battle, and I'm taking 1812, which is pretty standard for a lot of the 80 carries now. So as for the build on Kogmaw jungle, it is going to depend on the game. Obviously, you're not going to build the same thing every single game, but I will put a sample build up on screen here for you guys. Now, the one thing that I would recommend doing that I don't see a lot of other players doing or a lot of other guides recommending is that I would take Stalker's Blade instead of Skirmisher Saver on Kogmaw jungle. Now, the reason being is because Smite's range isn't all that long, and if you get in range to smite one of the enemies in a mid to late game team fight, then it probably means that you're caught out of position and you should be getting out of there. So that's why I would take Stalker's Blade instead of Skirmisher Saver, because the Stalkers will at least give you the slow on the enemy and the extra little bonus movement speed. So I think that it really doesn't matter getting that extra true damage off from the Skirmisher Saver, because you're already gonna do a whole lot of damage with your core item. So I would take Stalker's Blade instead of Skirmisher, just so you have a little bit more self peel. Now, as for the core build on Kogmaw jungle, obviously go Bloodrazor first, and then after that, Rageblade and Hurricane. Now, as for your other items, it really does depend on the situation. If the enemy doesn't have a whole lot of hard engage, then I would build Blade of the Ruined King next. But if you have found yourself getting caught out a lot during the game, or if they do have a really game-changing hard engage ability like a Leona ultimate or Morgana binding, then I would grab a QSS in that situation. Maybe even grab the QSS earlier before you finish your Hurricane, because if you are getting caught out a lot, then you might as well grab the QSS just so you can stay safer in those team fights. And then after that, it really does depend on the situation. You could go for Asterix if you want a little bit more survivability. You could even go a GA. It really just depends on how long the game is going. So I'm not going to be doing a tips portion to this video. Now, the reason being is because I pretty much already covered some tips when I was talking about other parts of the video. For example, when I was talking about the build for Kogmaw, I told you to go Stalkers instead of Skirmishers, and at the start of the video, I told you to start Krugs instead of Gromp, because the Krugs will get you that stun, and therefore you'll be able to clear a lot stronger in the early game as Kog. If I were to give Kogmaw jungle a rating out of 10, I would give him a 7 out of 10 right now. The reason being is because his early game is definitely exploitable if he is going up against a strong early game jungler like a Nidalee or Kha'Zix or Lee Sin. So if you are going up against one of those junglers, then I would recommend just making sure you ward up in the early game so they don't end up invading on you. If you do fall behind with Kogmaw, you are pretty weak, which is another reason why I did not rate him higher. He also cannot be picked in every single team comp. You do have to make sure that your top lane is tanky at least. If your team doesn't have any tanks at all, then picking Kogmaw jungle is probably not going to suit you well once you do get to mid to late game team fights. So because he isn't the most versatile pick, that is also why I rated him a 7 out of 10. So overall, guys, Kogmaw jungle is definitely a very fun and a different pick to play. So if you're bored of a lot of the junglers you've been playing recently, then definitely look to pick up Kogmaw jungle, even if it's just in normal games. And if it is in ranked, then just make sure your top and your support is tanky, because if they are tanky, you can do really, really well with Kogmaw jungle. But if you don't have a tank top and you don't have a tank support, then once you get to mid to late game, your comp isn't going to be the strongest. So with that being said, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.